And we are back with the money couple. And during the break, we were kind of talking about our different personalities and how they can clash. Even if you have one that's together, usually the secondary one isn't, and that can lead to some clashing here. So how can you fight fair? Because you have different techniques like the money huddle and the money dump. How can couples learn how to fight fair when it comes to money?
Well, it's very important to realize when you're about ready to get into a fight. And identifying that is the key. And diffusing the situation by stepping away for a little while helps so much. And once you do step away, try to think of a couple of ways that you can come to conclusion or options that you can talk about. One of the things that we get into a fight and it's just heated and it's completely emotional. If we step aside and both think of a couple of different ideas to be able to compromise about, that will help tremendously. And we found that to be so helpful. Whenever we start fighting about money, it's like just step aside for just a minute, and that will diffuse the situation. And that's probably the key and the first step. There's 8 steps to fighting fair, but that's the first part.
When it comes to his and her bank accounts, checking accounts, are you guys advocates of that or opponents, or doesn't it really matter?
Well, I think it definitely does matter. And I think there's definitely cases where separate checking accounts make sense. If you're an independent contractor and you're trying to keep your business finances separate from your personal finances, I think that makes a lot of sense. However, we're not large proponents of separate checking accounts, because this is usually what happens, is it lets that financial infidelity really fester. Because the reality is, if you're managing this part of your money and I'm managing this part of my money, it's separate.
And secrets can happen.
And secrets do happen. And suddenly, if you're paying the mortgage and I'm paying the utilities and you're paying this, you're basically setting up 2 independent businesses inside that relationship. And I don't believe that's really the way that God intended for us to have marriage. I think we're supposed to be unified. We're supposed to work together. And that's one of the things that we talk a lot about in this book, is how do we come together and form a business partnership inside your relationship. We've interviewed hundreds of couples in this book, and we've seen circumstances where the money was so separate, and that, when they came together, they started talking and they started communicating, and so many things were just put out on the table. Past hurts, past situations, and it brought that relationship tighter together, and they would never go back to separate checking accounts because now they're on the same page about finances, which almost never happens when you keep your money separate.
Now, when you have separate checking accounts, if that's something that you need to do, we have a communication system called the Money Huddle. And what that does is allow you on a monthly basis to come together and talk about your finances. So even if you did, for whatever reason, just on a practical basis, need separate accounts, at least you're coming together once a month and talking about where all the money, exactly, put it all out on the table.
Right. Along the lines of having separate accounts, if someone happens to be better with money than the other spouse, should one person control? Well, you know what I mean? Like one person is better at
financial person.
Like you said, I tend to put the bill and
I mean, balancing a checkbook and keeping
balancing the checkbook,
payments on time,
the payments on time.
Okay,
those crucial things.
We find that in a relationship there usually is the money person,
right?
Because that's the reality. That happens to do with the opposites attract type things, and so usually we find somebody that there is a leader in the relationship when it comes to the finances, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what we find is that if that person takes too much control of the finances, suddenly they're controlling those purse strings, and then we've got some major issues.
And financial infidelity can happen.
Right. We find that 2/3 of all women have either separate checking accounts or secret credit cards that their husbands don't know about.
Dun, dun, dun.
2/3 of women?
Dun, dun,
How about the men?
It's interesting. It's less than 1/3. So, but that doesn't say that women are hoarding money or they're hiding money. What we find in a lot of situations is that the man has deemed himself as the financial person, and he holds those purse strings so tight that the women are saying, hey, you know what, I don't have any flexibility with this money anyways. I'm going to have my own secret checking account or my own credit card. And so that's another reason that we suggest working, as one out of one account.
Right. What about when you can't agree on certain things? Let's say, I know it's a very difficult economic situation right now, and let's say my parents or my husband's parents have the means to loan us money, right? Sure. And one wants to and one doesn't. What should you do in a situation like that? And should you ever borrow from relatives?
Okay, there's 2 questions there, and the first one is it's very important to compromise. And how often do we not compromise in a relationship? Let's say that there was an amount of money that you want to borrow. What about borrowing half of it instead of all or nothing? So that whole idea of compromise is so important. But the other issue is talking about borrowing money from relatives.
Right.
And just like you borrow money from a bank or a financial institution, it's important to have an agreement.
Okay.
It's important to have an agreement in writing, and it's important to be appropriate. And a lot of times that all three of those things don't happen.
Because that's tough when you're dealing with relatives, because they get offended. If you say, okay, I'll loan you this money, or vice versa, but you have to sign this, they get very offended.
Right.
Shouldn't care about that.
Yeah,
But
I
if they-
mean,
Go ahead.
I had a couple in the office that we were dealing with that, and they were looking at putting a down payment for their home. And they were a younger couple, and his family had a lot of means, and she was really uncomfortable with borrowing from his parents. And we sat down and went through that process. And the compromise was, we'll borrow this money, but you have to have an outline of how that payment is going to get paid back to the parents, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you feel like money is being held over your head, or you feel like there's inappropriate use of the home that you just bought that they, And so you just have a lot of those issues that you have to hash through.
So you really got to treat it like just as they were a commercial lender.
Absolutely. And then there's no hurt feelings that will happen with that.
Right.
It's kind of like the 10 Commandments. We think of that as so restrictive. But you know what? Actually, the 10 Commandments gives us freedom. And the outlining of a contract will actually give you freedom in the relationship to know and understand all of the...
Right. This is the contract, and this is our family or our personal relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
What about the debt issue? Obviously, economic times, a downturn economy, all the things that are going on that we hear in the news. For families that have been pressured with and saddled with a lot of debt, how can they begin to deal with that and not let that become another time bomb in their relationship?
Again, it is so important to communicate and to know what's real. When we talk about our money huddles, we talk about understanding and looking and seeing what's real. And what's so easy to happen in these times is just to hide the bills or to not look at them, but to really look at what's real and to decide on what your plan is going to be and decide on that together. It's so easy when there's one financial person. They kind of decide instead of talking about it, communicating about it together. And now with these tough economic times, it is more and more important to communicate, to understand each other's money personalities, and to really get in there and understand each other's finances, because that is, again, will give you freedom because you have some understanding.
I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of is that the path that we're on economically is people are pretty panicked right now.
Yes.
I mean, there is just so much. We're seeing incomes cut in half as people are losing their jobs. We're dealing with this every week as we have, as we're sitting down with people where they're having to just totally look at their whole picture and they're having to rethink it because of the economy and because of the debt. And one of the situations that I think we're in is when we have these times, we get and everything has to be paid off by tomorrow. We have to do this and we have to do this, and we just kind of go in this major go mode, and we don't step back and say, okay, what's going to be really best for our relationship and what's going to be best for our family? So if it takes you 5 years to pay off that credit card instead of 3 years, and the reason you're doing it over 5 years is so you can maintain balance in the family, so that you can continue to do the things that are important to you, take the 5 years.
Right.
Because, and that's the compromise. If you've got one that says, hey, we have to have this paid off in 22 months, and I've used this calculator and this amortization schedule, we can have this done. And the other one's saying,
but we're not going to eat.
Yeah, so we're on
Kids are not
ramen
gonna
and
get their
macaroni and
shoes.
cheese for the next 18 months. Yeah, but we see, and that's the tension that can mount so quickly in a relationship. And so a lot of times I'll say, okay, time out. Let's step back. And I'll say, and Bethany and I'll be looking at each other like, let's just slow this boat down and let's look at what's real. And okay, what if we did this payback over a 5-year period and you could actually eat vegetables?
Right.
That's why we're so excited about First Comes Love, Then Comes Money, because we give hope. And especially in these times, being able to learn how to communicate is key.
And one of the things I love that you guys say is, even above the money, a loving relationship is the most important thing that you can have. Forget the money even, but that love is very, very important.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, the bad news is that we're out of time. But the good news is that you guys are doing a series for the Harvest Show, so make sure to tune in. You're going to get much more from the money couple on the coming up Harvest Shows. Guys, thank you so much for being with us.
you.
If you'd like to connect with the Palmers, you can visit us at harvest-tv.com. Again, the name of the book is First Comes Love, Then Comes Money. And you can click on Show Info in the menu bar to find an easy way to link to their website. We'll be right back.
Right behind me is the western wall, also called the Wailing Wall. You know,